The ultrasound machine beeped like a slow heartbeat, counting down to something nobody in that room was ready for. Nolan Ashby stood against the wall of the examination room at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, hands jammed in his jacket pockets, watching the monitor like it held the answer to a prayer he'd been whispering for 3 years. His wife, Brenly, lay on the table, the paper sheet crinkled every time she shifted. She kept her eyes on the ceiling. Not on him, not on the doctor, not on the screen, just the ceiling. Later, Nolan would remember that. He would replay the way she stared up at nothing and wonder if part of her already knew what was coming. Dr. Everett Pruitt was 54 years old, a man who had seen 10,000 scans in his career. He delivered news of joy and news of grief in the same calm, practiced voice. Nothing rattled him, nothing. Until today. Nolan watched the doctor's hand stop moving. The cursor froze on the screen. Dr. Pruitt leaned closer to the monitor, then leaned back. And this was the part Nolan would never forget. He looked at Brenly first. That look lasted less than 2 seconds, but it said everything. "Mr. Ashby." Dr. Pruitt's voice was careful, measured. "Can you step into the hallway with me for a moment?" Brenly's jaw tightened. She said nothing. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. Fluorescent lights buzzed above them. Dr. Pruitt looked left. He looked right. Then he stepped so close to Nolan that Nolan could see the grey threading through the man's eyebrows. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper.
"I've been doing this for 18 years.
I've been doing this for 18 years, and I don't say what I'm about to say lightly." He paused. "Mr. Ashby, divorce her, immediately. Her fallopian tubes have been ligated, professionally. This was not an accident, and it was not recent. Someone made a very deliberate decision, and it was not you." The hallway tilted. Or maybe Nolan tilted. He pressed one hand against the wall to stop himself from sliding down it. "How long?" he heard himself ask. Based on what I'm seeing. 18 months? Maybe longer? 18 months. While Nolan had been taking prenatal vitamins, yes, you read that right. He researched what vitamins a father should take before conception. His wife had already made sure there would be no conception. Ever. But to understand why a doctor risked his entire career to whisper those words in a hospital corridor, we have to go back 5 years. Back to where Nolan Ashby made the one mistake that costs good men everything. He loved someone completely.
Here's what nobody tells you about a certain kind of betrayal. It doesn't start with cruelty. It starts with charm. It starts with someone studying you, your generosity, your patience, your loyalty, and quietly deciding how far those things can be stretched before they break.
Brenly Ashby, born Brenly Koss, grew up in Scottsdale, Arizona. Sharp mind, beautiful, relentlessly ambitious in a way she had learned to keep hidden under warmth and easy laughter. She met Nolan at a rooftop fundraiser in downtown Phoenix when they were both 28. He was an operations manager for a logistics company, steady and serious, with a quiet kind of confidence.
It is? So
she was a junior marketing strategist at a firm that was paying her half of what she was worth. He bought her a drink. She asked him a question most people never think to ask on a first night. What do you actually want your life to look like in 10 years? He told her, and every answer she heard, she filed away like a contractor reading blueprints. By the time they married 2 years later, in a ceremony at the Biltmore in Phoenix, with 200 guests and a floral budget that made Nolan wince and laugh at the same time, Brenly had already built a map. Nolan just didn't know he was on it. Let's talk about who Nolan Ashby actually was, because this story only hits the way it should if you understand what was sitting across from Brenly at that dinner table every single night. Nolan was the kind of man who remembered, not just birthdays and anniversaries. He remembered the small things, the way Brenly liked her coffee during winter versus summer, the name of her college roommate's dog, the color of the dress she wore the night she first cried in front of him.
I remember everything about you.
When Brenly got the chance to take a high-paying brand director position in Los Angeles, it meant Nolan had to turn down a promotion that would have moved them both forward. He didn't blink. He called his manager and declined the offer, and that evening he made a reservation at Catch LA to celebrate her new title. "You sure?" she asked him over the candles. "The only thing I'm sure about," he said, "is us." She smiled and squeezed his hand. And somewhere inside that beautiful head of hers, she categorized that moment, filed it, moved on. Over 3 years in LA, Nolan covered the mortgage on their house in Hancock Park. He handled the car payments, the insurance, and the utility bills. He managed the joint accounts while Brenly built her private savings account alone. She said it was a safety net. He called it smart. She called it a runway. And children? That subject was the only door in their marriage that stayed permanently locked. "I just want us to be ready," she would say, "when we're truly ready." "Whenever you are," Nolan always answered. Always. 3 years of always being there. He started seeing a fertility specialist on his own because 2 OBGYNs had told them both they were perfectly healthy and the timing should work. He took supplements. He tracked sleep cycles. He read books about what kind of environment produces healthy pregnancies. He told Brenly about the specialist one evening. She nodded warmly and said, "That's so sweet, babe." Then she called her best friend Ottoline Marsh and said something very different. Ottoline Marsh lived in a sleek, high-rise condo in Century City. She was 34, a corporate attorney who wore ambition like jewelry and believed with genuine conviction that the worst thing a woman could do was let a man slow her down.
To that. And always.
On the surface, she was Brenly's biggest supporter. She showed up to every celebration, knew every update, and sent the most expensive birthday gifts. But what she was really doing, in every phone call and every wine-soaked girls' weekend in Santa Barbara, was running a quiet campaign. "You're too sharp for this, Bren," Ottoline said once, scrolling through property listings at a West Hollywood rooftop bar. "A man like Nolan is a safe choice. Safe choices don't build empires." "He's good to me," Brenly said. "Good, yes. A golden retriever is good to you. That's not the same as matching your energy." Brenly laughed, but she filed it. The truth, the actual truth that Ottoline never admitted out loud, was that she'd tried to build something with a steady, emotionally present man once, and she'd left him for someone flashier, someone who barely noticed she existed. She spent 5 years healing from that choice, and somewhere in that healing, she decided that men like Nolan were traps, not gifts. She projected all of that onto Brenly. And Brenly, brilliant, beautiful, and quietly terrified that her ambition would never have enough room, let Ottoline's voice become her own inner voice. The plan took shape slowly. Use Nolan's financial stability while building her own career, her own portfolio, and her own assets. Once she felt truly secure, she would leave. She would leave for someone she considered an equal, someone ambitious, not just kind. Children were never part of that plan. They would complicate the exit. They would tie her to Nolan in ways that were legally and emotionally impossible to undo. So 18 months before that ultrasound, Brenly Ashby walked into a private practice in Beverly Hills, used her medical insurance under her maiden name, and had her tubes tied. She told Nolan nothing. She told no one except Ottoline, who simply said, "Smart." 2 years before the hospital, there was a night that changed his internal weather permanently. It was after a dinner party at their home in Hancock Park. The guests had gone. Nolan was cleaning up in the kitchen, and through the thin wall separating the kitchen from the back patio, he heard Brenly's voice. She was on the phone with Ottoline. She'd had 2 glasses of Merlot. Her filter was completely down. Nolan froze at the sink. He didn't react, not immediately. His hands were still wet when he reached for his phone, set it quietly on the counter near the window, and pressed record. "He's not a husband, Ottoline. He's a stepping stone. I'm not cruel about it. I do care about him. But once I have the house in my name and enough in savings, I'm gone. A man that simple, that sweet. He doesn't deserve to trap me with children. He's not built for where I'm going." Nolan stood completely still. The water was still running. His hands went cold. He said nothing. He walked back out, poured himself a glass of water, and sat on the couch while Brenly came in, laughing about something Ottoline had said. He smiled back. He kissed her forehead. He said goodnight. And the next morning, while Brenly was at work, Nolan went to an electronics store in Culver City and bought a digital voice recorder. Not to build a case, not out of rage, but because something cold had settled inside him that night. The quiet, terrible certainty that what he'd heard was not a one-time slip. It was the truth. He never set another trap. He never tried to catch her again. He simply kept the recorder in his jacket pocket at all times, the way some people carry a spare key, just in case. The patio conversation was already on it. He had documented it the very next morning using the small Bluetooth device and a memory card, extracting the audio from the window through the kitchen wall. For 2 years, that recording sat untouched, until the day a doctor whispered in a hospital hallway. Nolan walked back into that examination room the way a man walks into water. Slowly, like he was testing how deep it went. Brenly had sat up on the table. Her hair was perfect, her posture was composed. She looked at him with the expression he now understood, not nervousness, but calibration. She was calculating how much he knew. "Everything okay?" she asked. Nolan looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Why didn't you tell me?" She blinked. Something behind her eyes shifted, a door clicking shut. "Tell you what?" "Brenly." And then something remarkable happened. The composure didn't just crack, it detonated. She swung off the table and her voice rose. "I cannot believe you'd listen to me. I can't believe you would come in here and question me like this after everything I've been through. Do you know how much pressure I've been carrying? You've been pushing me for years. Years. And now you're going to make me feel like a criminal because of my own body, my own medical choices." The tears came on cue, beautiful, practiced, devastating. A young nurse stepped through the partially open door. Her name tag read Destiny. She looked barely 25 and completely certain of herself. "Sir," she said, her voice firm, "this is her body. You need to lower your voice or I will call security." The room stacked up against him completely. Nolan Ashby, the man who had declined promotions, built a nursery in his head, taken supplements, and prayed quietly in parking lots before every fertility appointment, stood there looking, to everyone present, like the villain. He could feel it. The nurse's hand is hovering near the call button. Dr. Pruitt is standing slightly in front of Brenly like a shield, the whole room turning on a river of tears. 30 seconds of pure silence. 45 seconds. Nolan exhaled through his nose, reached into his jacket pocket. He pressed play. The voice that came out of that small recorder was unmistakably Brenly's, 2 years younger, 2 glasses of warm Merlot, completely unguarded. "He's not a husband, Otterline. He's a stepping stone. Once I have the house in my name and enough in savings, I'm gone. A man that simple, that sweet, he doesn't deserve to trap me with children." The nurse went absolutely still. Dr. Pruitt looked at the floor. Brenly's face drained, not with shame, not with anger, just drained, like someone reached behind her and pulled the plug. No one spoke for what felt like a very long time. When Nolan finally opened his mouth, his voice was steady as poured concrete. "I'm not the one who needs to calm down." He put the recorder back in his pocket, picked up his jacket, and walked out of Cedars-Sinai into the white, blinding Los Angeles afternoon. He sat in his car for 40 minutes. He did not turn on the radio. He did not call anyone. Rain had started to fall, which in Los Angeles is always strange and a little cinematic, like the city itself was marking the moment. Drops hit the windshield in slow, uneven patterns. Nolan stared through the glass at the parking structure's grey wall. He thought about the nursery he'd mentally painted 17 different colors over 3 years. The names he'd written in a small notebook in his nightstand. A notebook Brenly never once noticed or asked about. He thought about his mother's voice. "The right woman will run toward your love, not set a timer on it." One tear ran down his face, just one. He wiped it with the back of his hand, started the car, and drove to his attorney's office on Wilshire Boulevard. Nolan had been referred to Dexter Kane 2 years earlier by a colleague, never expecting to use the number. Dexter was 51, a divorce attorney who had handled cases for athletes, executives, and heirs across Los Angeles County. He did not do drama, he did thoroughly. Nolan sat across from him in a leather chair and placed the recorder on the desk between them without a word. Dexter listened to the full recording. Then he sat back, folded his hands, and said, "Tell me everything. From the beginning. Leave nothing out." Nolan talked for 90 minutes. When he finished, Dexter Kane looked at the yellow legal pad covered in his own handwriting and said something that surprised Nolan. "You're not angry." "No," Nolan said. "Good," Dexter said. "Angry men make mistakes. You're going to need to be very, very patient for the next 60 days. Can you do that?" Nolan looked at the recorder on the desk. "I've been patient for 3 years," he said. 60 days is nothing." Dexter outlined the grounds: fraudulent concealment of a medical procedure directly relevant to the marital agreement. In California, the law around reproductive deception was complex, but the concealment of a surgical sterilization from a spouse who had actively and demonstrably been trying to conceive was grounds for annulment on the basis of fraud, not just divorce. That was the first layer. The recording gave them the second layer: evidence of premeditated financial exploitation and documented intent to deceive within the marriage. "The house," Dexter said, tapping his pen. "Tell me about the house." "Joint mortgage, both names. I've paid every installment." "Bank statements." 3 years of them." Dexter smiled for the first time. "She's been building her runway on your runway," he said. "That's going to be a very expensive flight out." Here's what Brenly expected in the days after the hospital: rage, confrontation, the kind of tearful kitchen argument that could be managed, redirected, and turned into her narrative. She had scripts prepared. She had more tears ready. What she got instead was Nolan coming home that evening, making dinner, and asking how her day had gone. Calmly. Warmly. Like nothing had happened. She stared at him across the kitchen island and felt, for the first time in 3 years, genuinely unsettled. "Nolan." "Dinner's almost ready," he said. She called Otterline that night in a whisper from the bathroom. "Something's wrong. He's not reacting." "Maybe he's in shock," Otterline said. "Give it a few days. He'll fall apart." He did not fall apart. Over the next 30 days, Nolan moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who had already made peace with every outcome. He made copies of all financial documents, mortgage statements, joint account histories, and 3 years of direct deposit records. He photographed the contents of her private filing cabinet, the one she thought he'd never touched. He compiled a folder of receipts, insurance claims, and records that traced the timeline of her medical procedure back to the exact date she'd used her maiden name. He did not move out. He did not stop being kind. He brought her coffee in the mornings, the same way he always had. He was building a case the way a master craftsman builds furniture. Slowly, invisibly, and with absolute precision. And you know what? There's a lesson right there. Because anybody can explode. That's easy. What takes real strength is to feel the full weight of a betrayal, fold it neatly, and then use it. On day 31, while Brenly was at a brand strategy conference in San Francisco, Nolan changed all the passwords on every joint account. He drained the joint savings. Legally, since his name was on every account and he had the paper trail to show it was funded almost entirely by his income, and moved the funds into a personal account at a separate bank. He did not touch her private savings. He didn't need to. He just removed the floor she'd been planning to land on. The divorce papers were filed in Los Angeles County Superior Court on a Tuesday morning. Grounds: fraudulent concealment of a surgical procedure material to the marriage. Supporting evidence: medical documentation obtained through Dr. Pruitt's formal report, financial records spanning 36 months, and 1 audio recording. Brenly received the papers at her office in Culver City at 2:14 in the afternoon, delivered by a process server in a grey suit, who handed her the envelope with the same expression someone uses when handing back a parking ticket. Her assistant Petra watched from across the open floor plan as Brenly opened the envelope, read the first page, and sat down very slowly in her chair. She called Otterline immediately. "He filed," Brenly said. "Fraud. He actually filed fraud." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "How does he have medical documentation?" Otterline asked. "The doctor," Brenly said. "Pruitt. He must have—" She stopped. "The recording. Otterline, that recording from the patio 2 years ago." Another pause, longer this time. "You told me you'd found it and deleted it," Brenly said. "I thought you had it," Otterline said quietly. The silence between them was the sound of a plan collapsing. Nolan did not post anything. He did not send mass emails. He did not make speeches. He simply forwarded a clean, edited version of the recording, just the essential 40 seconds. To 6 people: Brenly's mother Claudette, her older brother Reef, 2 of their closest mutual friends, a senior partner at Brenly's firm who had personally vouched for her character during a promotion review, and Otterline Marsh's husband Garrison. 6 people. That's all it takes in Los Angeles. The city is enormous, but the circles are small, and information moves through them like wildfire through dry canyon brush. Claudette Koss called her daughter within an hour of receiving it. The conversation lasted 4 minutes and ended with Claudette saying, "I have nothing to say to you right now," and hanging up. Reef, Brenly's brother, sent a single text. "How could you do this to him?" The senior partner at her firm called her into a meeting the following morning. Brenly sat across from him while he explained that the company took personal integrity very seriously, particularly for employees in client-facing brand leadership roles, and that the audio, which had been shared among several people in their professional network, had created a situation that needed to be addressed. She was placed on administrative review. And Garrison Marsh. Garrison Marsh had been quietly suspicious of Otterline's influence over Brenly for 2 years. He'd asked about it once and been dismissed entirely. When he received Nolan's email at 9:47 on a Wednesday morning, he listened to the recording 3 times with his office door closed. Then he called his own attorney. Otterline's marriage began to unravel the same week as Brenly's. Nobody planned that. It simply happens the way consequences happen when you build something crooked. Eventually the whole structure leans. On the 45th day, Brenly came home to Hancock Park. Nolan was in the living room reading. He had not moved out because the house was as much his as hers, and Dexter Kane had advised him to stay put. She stood in the doorway for a moment before she spoke. "You could have just talked to me," she said. Her voice was different now. The armor was off. "You could have come to me and said you heard what I said on that patio, and we could have worked through it." Nolan put down his book. He looked at her the way you look at someone you've loved for a long time. With clarity, not cruelty. "You could have just told me you didn't want children," he said. "We could have adopted. We could have done surrogacy. We could have built a full, beautiful life without kids. And I would have chosen it. Because I was choosing you. But you didn't tell me. You didn't trust me with the truth of who you were. Instead, you lied for years, sterilized yourself behind my back, and treated me like a transaction you were waiting to close." He stood up. "Enjoy the freedom you wanted so badly, Brenly. It's yours now." He picked up his jacket from the armchair and went to the bedroom, closing the door behind him with a soft final click. She stood in the living room alone for a very long time. And this is the part that should make you stop and think. Because Brenly Koss was not a monster. She was a woman who had let fear and ambition and the wrong voice in her ear turn her into someone she probably never meant to be. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it. And understanding how people become the villains of someone else's story is one of the most important things any of us can do. 3 weeks after filing, Nolan Ashby sat down with Dexter Kane and looked at the full financial picture. The joint assets, the savings, the investments, the portfolio they'd built together were substantial. Nolan's name was on the majority of it, and his contribution record was airtight. He was legally entitled to take everything he'd put in. His attorney confirmed it. His accountant confirmed it. He took what he needed, and then he did something nobody saw coming. He restructured a significant portion of the shared investment portfolio, a sum that represented roughly what Brenly had consumed in joint household expenses over 3 years while building her own private savings, and donated it to the Vasquez Family Fertility Foundation, a Los Angeles-based nonprofit that provided financial assistance to couples struggling with infertility treatment. He made the donation in Brenly's full legal name, as the donor. The foundation sent a formal thank you letter, a donor recognition certificate, and a social media acknowledgement to Brenly Koss Ashby, thanking her for her generous contribution to helping families achieve the dream of parenthood. Nolan mailed her the letter, the actual paper letter in a cream envelope, along with a handwritten note on a small card that said, "Since you made sure we could never have a family, I made sure this money helps couples who actually want one. Consider it your contribution. N. The Foundation's social media post went out on a Thursday. It tagged Brenly's professional account by name. Her colleagues saw it. Her client saw it. Claudette saw it. Reef saw it. The cruelest part, and tell me this isn't genius, was that Brenly could not publicly reject the donation without explaining why she didn't want to be associated with helping infertile couples. She could not ask the Foundation to remove her name without inviting exactly the questions she could not answer. She was publicly thanked, publicly celebrated, for the one thing she had secretly destroyed in her own marriage. Garrison Marsh was not a man who made scenes. He was an architect, methodical and precise, and when he made the decision to end his marriage, he did it with the same thoroughness Nolan had done everything else. He had his own attorney, his own documentation, and after receiving Nolan's email, he had something else, a thread to pull. And when he pulled it, what unraveled was a pattern of Otterline's interference in his life that went well beyond Brenly's marriage. There were business conversations she'd steered, friends she'd quietly excluded, a career decision of his she'd manipulated from behind 3 layers of casual suggestion. Garrison filed 6 days after Nolan. He sent Nolan a text that said simply, "Thank you for the email, I should have known sooner." Nolan replied, "I'm sorry it landed on you too." "Don't be," Garrison wrote back, "some things need landing." Otterline Marsh spent the next month watching everything she had architected for other people get turned around and built into the case against herself. Her Century City condo went into the asset dispute. Her professional reputation took damage through the divorce proceedings, which Garrison, methodical to the end, ensured were not sealed. The circle of mutual friends they had all shared, gone, because when you build your influence on the relationships of others and those relationships collapse, there is nothing underneath you. 40 days after he moved out of Hancock Park into a clean rented apartment in Silver Lake, Brenly showed up at his building. It was a Sunday evening. He was on his balcony with coffee. He saw her before she buzzed. He watched her for a moment, the way she stood at the building entrance, arms crossed against the October chill, that familiar posture he had loved for years. He went inside, sat down on the couch, and did not buzz her in. His phone lit up. He let it go to voicemail. Her message, when he listened to it 20 minutes later, was the most honest thing she had ever said to him. Her voice cracked in places it had never cracked before, not with strategy, but with something real. She said Otterline had built something in her head that she'd let become the truth. She said she had cared about him more than she'd admitted to herself. She said she was sorry in the way that sounds different from every other sorry. Lower, heavier, stripped of performance. Nolan listened to it twice. Then he forwarded the voicemail to Garrison Marsh because it contained, without Brenly realizing it, a full admission of the plan she and Otterline had built together. Garrison's attorney used it in the proceedings. Nolan deleted the original from his phone, blocked her number, and went back out to the balcony to finish his coffee. He did not feel good about it. He did not feel bad about it either. He just felt finished, and sometimes finished is the only thing left to feel. 6 months later, Silver Lake. His name was his own again. The divorce was finalized on a rainy February morning in Los Angeles County Superior Court. Dexter Kane shook his hand on the courthouse steps and said, "You handled yourself with more dignity than most men half your age." Nolan said, "I had a good reason to." He had a 2-bedroom apartment in Silver Lake now, 2 blocks from the reservoir. He ran every morning. He called his mother on Sundays. He started coaching a youth logistics program at a community center in East LA on Thursday evenings, something he'd wanted to do for years but never had the emotional bandwidth for while managing everything Brenly's life had demanded of him. He was not happy in the loud way people post about on Instagram. He was steady, and steady for a man who had been quietly drowning for 3 years felt like the best thing in the world. There was a woman at his old workplace. Her name was Yardley Osei, and she was a supply chain director who had worked 2 floors below him for 4 years. She had always greeted him by name, always remembered small things he mentioned in passing. When his father had been ill 2 years earlier and Nolan had missed a meeting, she'd left a coffee on his desk with a post-it that said, "Take care of yourself first." He'd noticed her. He'd never let himself think about it. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, he ran into Yardley at a farmer's market in Los Feliz. She was buying heirloom tomatoes. He was looking for decent coffee beans. They talked for 40 minutes standing in the middle of the market and then walked to a nearby bench and talked for another hour. No rush, no agenda, just two people discovering that the conversation with the right person feels like breathing properly for the first time in a long while. He did not ask her on a date that day. He texted her that evening. "I enjoyed today. I'd like to do it again sometime, properly, if you're open to it." She replied, "I've been open to it for 4 years. I was just waiting for you to be ready." She thought his kindness was weakness. Yardley O.C. understood immediately that it was the most difficult thing she'd ever watched a person carry with grace. People ask sometimes, and maybe you're asking right now, whether Nolan ever regretted the years, whether he would take them back if he could. He was asked this once, months later, by his younger cousin Brixton over dinner in Pasadena. Brixton was 26 and terrified of the wrong relationship and using Nolan's story as a kind of cautionary map. "Do you wish you'd never married her?" Brixton asked. Nolan thought about it for a real moment, not a polished answer moment, an actual moment. "I wish she'd been honest," he said, "but I don't regret who I was in that marriage. I was exactly the man I wanted to be. She just wasn't the right place for him to live." Dr. Everett Pruitt received a bottle of scotch in the mail 8 months after the hospital visit, with a card that said only, "Thank you for 18 years of doing the right thing. N.A." Pruitt kept the card on his desk. Brenly Koss relocated to Seattle 14 months after the divorce. She had a job, a smaller apartment than she'd planned, and a social world that had been rebuilt from the ground up. The story of what she'd done had moved through the networks of Los Angeles the way those stories always do, quietly, completely, and without mercy. Some of those bridges she would never rebuild. She thought about Nolan more than she expected to. Not with longing exactly, with the particular weight of understanding, something too late. Otterline Marsh was practicing law in San Diego now. Solo, different life, different pace. Whether she learned anything from any of it is a question only she could answer, and she hasn't answered it publicly. Garrison Marsh remarried 18 months after his divorce. He sent Nolan an invitation to the small ceremony in Malibu. Nolan couldn't make it, but sent a gift and a handwritten note. Garrison framed the note. He told his new wife it came from the man who accidentally gave him his life back. She thought my kindness was weakness. It was actually the strength to walk away clean and build something real without her. And the doctor who whispered in that hallway, "Divorce her immediately." He did, the next day, and he made sure she would never forget the cost of treating love like a stepping stone. Because here is the thing about people who use good people. They always think the ending belongs to them. They plan it, budget it, and time it. They think they're the ones who will walk away clean. But kindness, real kindness, the kind that is built from choosing someone every single day without being asked, that is not a weakness, it is a record. It is evidence. It is a standard that every person who ever received it will eventually measure every future moment against. Brenly Koss will measure every relationship she ever has against what Nolan Ashby was. That is not a punishment assigned by a court, it is just the truth of what she let go. And Nolan, he got up, he got still, he got surgery, and then he got free. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Patience is not passivity. Nolan's 60 days of silence was not weakness or avoidance, it was strategy. Knowing when not to move is just as important as knowing when to strike. Patience held in the right direction is one of the most powerful tools a person can carry. Real accountability cannot be outrun. Brenly did not lose her professional reputation because Nolan attacked her publicly. She lost it because the truth found the right 6 people. You do not need an audience to dismantle a lie, you only need precision.